You're listening to Tonebender's Sound Design Podcast, presented by Sound Ideas. This is the show where we talk with the sonic artists behind our favorite films, games, and series. As the new year begins, Sound Ideas is offering its largest sale to date. For a limited time, receive 55% off professionally recorded sound effects and music libraries. This New Year promotion applies across their esteemed catalog, making it an ideal moment to expand or update your professional collection with authentic audio and a proven standard of quality. The Sound Ideas New Year's sale is available now for a limited time, so go visit sound-ideas.com right away. Hello and welcome to Tonebender Sound Design Podcast. My name is Tim, and if you'll just give me a few ticks of the clock, you can join me and the sound team from Wicked for Good. This is going to be an especially interesting conversation today, because I got to talk with this crew almost exactly a year ago to break down Wicked on Tonebender's episode number 293. So this will be the first time I've ever got to kind of do a breakdown of both halves of a series like this, and I'm really excited to see how the process evolved and how it changed and how maybe it didn't change. So let's introduce our guests today. First up, we have Jack Dolman, Wicked for Good Supervising Music Editor. It's great to talk to you again, Jack. Good to see you.
So good to be here, Tim. Thanks for having us.
Next, we have the film's Supervising Sound Editors. First up, we have Nancy Nugent Title. Welcome, Nancy. It's great to have you back.
Thanks so much for having us.
Also joining me is John Marquis, who, in addition to being a Supervising Sound Editor, also served as the sound designer and re-recording mixer. John, it's great to talk to you.
Hey, Tom. Thanks for having us.
And then finally, we have the film's production sound mixer, Simon Hayes. It's always great to spend time with you, Simon. Good to see you again.
Tim, it's great to be chatting with you again.
Great. So I think that for the first question I have is that this film is just a massive effort for a sound team. The music is the star. It's what's filling the seats because people are familiar with the music from the play and people listening to the soundtrack for a long time. But in order for the audience to really buy into the world of the film, it needs to feel real. But not real like 2026 Earth real like the Land of Oz real. The last time we spoke, right near the end of the discussion, Jack mentioned that the whole team's philosophy was that every sound had to have an Ozian twist to it. And that day, we were right at the end of the interview, so I didn't get to really explore that further. So I'm wondering if maybe we can go around the horn now and talk about how each of you approach the film with that philosophy. How do you give sound an Ozian twist? Maybe, Jack, since you mentioned it before, do you want to take that first?
Sure. I mean, this is a directive that John Chu has given us since the very beginning, is that we are in the world of Oz. It's adjacent to the world that we know. It's adjacent to Kansas, if you will. But Oz is special. It's magical. Coming from the music side, you know, even the elements of the music, whether it's the score from John Powell and Stephen Schwartz or the songs themselves from Stephen Schwartz and his team, they all contained Ozian elements. I'm thinking of a few different examples from the score. John Powell, in the second film, made use of these very subtle recorder woodwind sounds that kind of play underneath some of the scenes to give it a kind of strangeness, off-kilter type sound. Within the songs, there's a classic use of the ebow, which is something that you slide across the fretboard of a guitar. It kind of gives the guitar a sort of theremin kind of woo feel. And that was something that was in the Broadway show for years. We employed that to great effect in Wicked for Good. So those are a couple musical elements, but they are all across the sonic board for sure.
John, do you want to talk about adding Ozian twists to your sound design?
Well, sure. You know, just springboard off what Jack's saying, you know, this is all kind of top down. I mean, we all have an idea of what we believe is Ozian and how our memories serve us and all that kind of stuff. But, you know, from John Chu, he was saying from the beginning, you know, emotion is our superpower. So we're looking at these sounds and we're making sure that they have some element of whimsy, something that sparks your inner child, something that kind of makes it more special and more unique than just something that is a cool sound. It has to be playful. It has to be evocative. And of course, that's wildly subjective. Sound is innately abstract, right? It's like you can literally put any sound to an image and you either believe it or you don't. And so there's just a lot of play when it came to designing the sound effects and sound design elements of the movie, the practical things that everyone's engaging in and the subjective stuff. It's got to be evocative. It has to have this real life adjacent kind of feel to it that is makes you want to smile and makes you think like, I recognize that sound, but I don't know how I recognize that sound. It's familiar, but I don't know if I've ever heard it before.
Nancy?
Yeah, it was really fun to play off of, like, the idea of things being Ozian was in every department. So even like hair and all the production design, every little mechanical item that the characters touch and use are all just so clever. and so different and yet identifiable that we got to be inspired by all of those elements as well. And then as far as dialogue, there's a lot of Ozian sort of dialect that we're hearing in the film for the words for the first time. And even our background Walla had to be tailored to Oz. So all of our loopers, many of whom, lucky for us, were, musical theater kids growing up. So they were very familiar and enthusiastic with being a part of Oz. But they came prepared with the right dialect for Munchkinland and the Emerald City and expressing themselves in an appropriate way, like not using contractions, not using really modern contemporary phrases of speech, things like that.
So contractions don't exist in Oz? Is that what I've just learned?
Well, you wouldn't say okay in Oz. You'd say all right. Things like that. Things that are just a little that lean contemporary.
So Simon, everyone just mentioned that everything is very Ozian, including the clothing. Did that make miking up everybody difficult, or how did the production sound team make things Ozian?
Well, here's the thing. There is nothing more Ozian than Paul Tazewell's costumes, right? That is the definition of Ozian. And those costumes always have boots, shoes, right? So what I tried to do was to just try and get these guys some ingredients. I wasn't crazy enough to know that every single bit of my Foley was going to be used. I, of course, knew that if I could just give them some nuggets of gold. And so wherever possible, we kind of ran a subwoofer track and got Chris's fantastic choreography with the foot stomps and stuff like that, with Paul Tazewell's actual boots doing the stomping on the actual set. And it's just a case of knowing that, okay, there's some ingredients that I can hand over to these guys, whether they'll use them in their entirety or whether they'll just be used as a reference, it doesn't matter as long as I'm giving them something as well as the live singing and the dialogue. So what I really tried to do whenever there was an opportunity, especially with groups, I tried to get some foot stomps, I tried to get some foot stamps, stuff like that. When you talk about miking up the costumes, yeah, really, really tricky costumes. What I didn't want to do from the get-go was ever say to Paul Tazewell, is there anything we can do about this fabric? Could we do something different? Because I knew exactly what he was trying to achieve. We had this big room before we shot anything. We had this big room full of references, full of pictures, full of Paul's designs. And it was basically John Chu and Mark Platt would take us around this room and just basically say, this is the world in which we're about to live for the next year. And it was very, very clear that these costumes were everything. And so what I did was, rather than look for a way of getting mics cleaner in a noisy costume, I went straight to Pablo Hellman, our VFX supervisor, and said, listen, I need your help. The great news is Pablo is also a musician. So he gets it. As soon as I started explaining, look, what I need is I need clean singing, he was like, I completely get it. You don't even need to tell me. You want me to paint out the mic? No problem. And where Paul was really, really collaborative with me was he never got upset that I was putting, a white pom-pom furry microphone on the outside of Ari's pink dress. I tried to make stuff look like it should be there for the rough cut and the audience test screenings, knowing that ultimately Pablo and the team at Framestore and ILM would remove all of that. But those things have to live, as you know, while the rough cut's going on. And we tried to make them look appropriate. But what Paul was fantastically foresighted with was he knew that those things weren't going to go in the movie. He knew that if I put a mic on the outside, it was going to get removed. So there was never any kind of ego about, oh, look, we can see that mic. We all got it. And in fact, John Chu never mentioned once to me mics in shot. We didn't do it all the time. We didn't overplay our cards. I only did it when I needed to. On 20% of the movie, Ari's got 2 white pom-poms on her pink dress, one on each side, which you can see in some of the behind the scenes bits and pieces. So that's how we dealt with it, really. We respected the costumes and we used visual effects to support the film, not just visually, but acoustically too.
I have to point out one of the most incredible miking moments I've ever seen. There is a physical fight between the two main characters. That's all production. All of their vocalizations are production, and mostly from Lobs, which I don't know what kind of magic you did, Simon, on set to get that, because typically you'd see a scene like that and just assume you're going to have to loop all the efforts and everything because of movement and mic noise, and there was none of that. It was incredible.
You know what, Nancy? there is a kind of old school attitude in filmmaking that microphones are the enemy. And it's kind of like, we paint out stunt wires, we paint out knee pads, we paint out crash mats, we paint everything out on a movie set. But the moment there's a mic on some films, it's like, oh my God, there's a microphone, get it out of here. That never happened on Wicked. We just had 100% support. And not only did we have support from John Chu and Pablo Hellman, but Cynthia and Ari and all of the cast never kind of said, well, hang on a second, I feel uncomfortable having that mic there. They were like, if that needs to be there, that's cool. And I think that one of the things that helped those, as well as them just being truly nice people, is the fact that they respect microphones because they understand that the microphone is their window to their audience. It's how their performance reaches that cinema screen and those speakers. And that comes from being true performance artists.
Well, now that we've talked about the fight scene, I was going to ask this later on, but since you brought it up, Nancy, that scene is an excellent example of all the departments kind of working together. I was going to ask how you got that on set, but then also it's a very funny sequence that leads to a very dark sequence right away. And to pull off that transition has got to be very tricky. Maybe we can go around the horn, maybe back to you, John, about doing the sound effects for that.
Well, sure. I mean, it's a funny scene, right? It's complicated. And so it took some real work and artistry from Myron and John to get it into a position that we could even begin working on it and have some sense of the rhythm and tempos and the cadence of all this stuff. It's kind of one of the more traditional, I guess, moments in the movie in regards to just hand-to-hand combat. And very physical, very practical. We're not doing magic. I mean, there is a little bit of, flipping and flying from Alphaba, but nothing that's outside the realm.
Well, there's the moment where she pushes her hair back and has a giant, like almost sci-fi whoosh to it. That's got a good laugh.
Yeah, we got a little back and forth between the swoosh of the broom and then the swoosh of Glinda's hair. But yeah, no, it was just a delicate balance. You play this was one of those scenes where it's like literally you play what you see and you riff off of what the characters are doing and just try not to get in the way. But, you want to accentuate the action. You want to tell the story emotionally, just with some practical sound design.
I mean, that whole section there's so much whiplash narratively happening in that section. You have the tragedy of Nessa's death. No, sorry for the spoilers. You have the entire cyclone. You have that tragic moment. You have a almost slapstick comedic sequence with the fight between our two leads. Then we go into the deeply tragic section of Fierro sacrificing himself so that Glinda can be free, which then launches us into a song. There's no reason why that sequence of events should make sense in the film, and yet it completely does. And the audience is along for the ride. They're feeling the emotion of Elphaba and her sister. They're laughing their heads off to the fight scene, and then they're invested in the song. And I think that we all really had to work together in order to make that kind of roller coaster work. Even with the music, shifting tones through there, but also letting the giggles and the sound design with their fight be center stage and be comedic, and then letting the song take off. It was a real dance. And I think that even though it probably would be challenging on the page, it really comes across and works in the film.
Yeah, Jack, I remember you going back and forth. Yeah, the tone of the music was just so imperative, from turning that into some kind of like silly Looney Tunes thing versus, the slapstick versus, I don't know, not
Absolutely.
Carrying the energy of it at all. It was really delicate musically.
It was really delicate. And I think that, John Powell's cue that he wrote through the fight sequence was controversial because it is very over the top in its kind of style of comedy. The temp music always played more of a kind of broad animation style of that fight, the back and forth, hitting the different cuts. John took a different view on it, and it was a tough pill to swallow at first because it was such a departure from what we were used to tonally. But in the end, it was really embraced by everybody because it was such an original piece of music, and it made no bones about the fact that we're going into this almost absurdist section of the movie. And the lesson I learned there was that sometimes the music really does need to say beyond the shadow of a doubt, this can be as absurd or as off the wall as we want it to be. And you can over deliver on that and give the audience the permission that it needs. It's about giving the audience permission, that whole sequence. And yeah, it was a tough one to get, but I think we got it.
It came together really well because you're right. Looking back, it shouldn't work. But upon my first viewing, I rode with it. Just quickly as an aside, my first viewing was with my 10-year-old daughter, who now this is like her entire world. Like she listens to the songs constantly. We went opening day, even though she was going with her friend's birthday party the next weekend. She was like, I cannot wait that long. It's just not a possibility. So it was a really fun night for me and her to go to the movies and see this film. So thank you for that.
Oh, love to hear share that.
But back to the questions. Near the end of the film, there's a duet between our two main characters. And at one point in the song, they're singing like inches apart from each other. Simon and Nancy, how do you get separation in a situation like that? Or you just don't, maybe? I don't know. Simon, you want to talk about recording that?
I mean, it's probably one of the most difficult recordings that I've ever done, but also the most beautiful recording I've ever done. Basically, my MO on Wicked for Good was support them, let them do whatever they want to do, never, ever let the technical side of sound mixing stand in the way of their emotions and their acting and their instinct. And so the first thing that we really lent hard on in Wicked for Good, not just the movie, but also the song that they're singing, which we're talking about for good, was we lent really hard on the keyboard. We basically went completely off tempo. Thank you very much, Jack, for supporting that. And what that allowed us to do before we get to that moment where they're duetting and they're nose to nose, it allowed Ari and Cynthia to completely riff with the script. And if you go back and remember, some of those lines are sung and some of them are spoken as dialogue. And what I can tell you was that was instinctive, the way that they felt on a take for take basis. No two takes were the same. And Ben Holder, our fantastic music associate who was also playing keyboard, was basically just accompanying them, never ever leading them. And sometimes that would mean in a gap, just going, okay, there's a gap here. I'm just going to play a melody, just ready to go again. Or sometimes it would just be, there's a gap here. I'm just going to give them the next note. When you hear what he did before the wonderful orchestration in post, what he did was quite incredible. He was definitely, another character in that scene. What that did was it gave complete freedom of emotion. And I think that you can really, if you look at the way that cinema audiences react to that song, I think that it tells a story about what happens when you can take a film, but you can have a Broadway theatre sensibility to it. In other words, they could do what they would be able to do on a Broadway stage, which is feel it. And Ben Holder in the IEM was the orchestra pit supporting whatever they wanted to do tempo-wise, which was really interesting. Now, to talk about the microphone techniques, the first day that we were filming for good, we were doing lots of swooping crane shots. We were kind of getting the big rock and roll type, music video type shots out of the way. And so we didn't really get booms in. But what I can tell you is that both of those actors had 2 DPAs on each. They had a DPA on the left lapel and a DPA on the right lapel. We just moved on to fully digital sound devices, A20 mini radio mics. So from the lav backwards, it was digital all the way. The transmission is 100% digital, which meant that I could really record lower and have extreme dynamic range, which was great. And it also meant that wherever they went, they had a lav. But the most important thing was when they start duetting, what I was thinking about, I kept putting myself into Nancy's position and Robin Bainton, who was our vocal editor's position, and thinking, what would I be doing at this point? And what I didn't try and do was to start mixing the blend of their voices. What I was essentially doing was, in my mix, which of course I know is not going to be used, but it's going to be there as a guide in Avid. But what I was kind of doing was rather than having a microphone open on each of them and trying to mix it, I was choosing whoever was softest in that moment of the duet and miking the other person off that person's radio mic. So there was only one radio mic open, which basically gave me that beautiful blend without any phasiness and supported the person that was singing softer and the person that was slightly louder. And so I was kind of, as they're duetting and they're playing with each other and going soft and loud, I'm crossfading between the two. On day number 2, John said, okay, look, we got those big crane shots, but I'm really feeling like where we need to be on this scene is really in close with their faces. And I was like, thank goodness for that, because we can get 2 Sharps boom mics in. And again, we were using CMD booms, which had just come out like 6 months previously. previously, where the signal gets turned into 48 kilohertz 24-bit in the actual microphone preamp and comes down a cable. We weren't using a radio, we were using cables back to me. So we're sending AES digits down the cables to me, which again gave me complete scope for huge dynamic range, recording a little bit lower, meaning that I'm never going to hit a limiter or a compressor. I can leave all of that to these guys in post. And I did exactly the same thing. I had the two microphones above the two actors, literally on most of those shots, 1 inch above the hairline. And I was really just playing one microphone, and with the lavs as well, knowing that choices that I were making were my best opportunity to give a guide, but also knowing that I was giving a wealth of choices to Nancy and Robin Bainton. And really, Tim, that's what I want to do. I don't want to lock anyone into anything. I want to give choices that can be auditioned in post, listened to through a Dolby Atmos system by John and Andy and Jack, massaged beautifully by Nancy and Robin, our vocal editor, and for me to feel like I've given them the ingredients.
I just want to add one thing to that, because just to enunciate how much of an influence those choices made in the character of this song. Simon said that his live mix was obviously going to change as we went through the process, but the reality of the situation was we used his live mix approach all the way through post-production in the Avid the entire time through our temp mixes, and the character of that mix is what we used as a philosophy on the final mix. And I can't overstate how intelligent that decision to ride the vocals was, because the reality with Cynthia Erivo and Ariana Grande is that they are so locked in vocally and emotionally that when their levels do match and when they are hitting the same note, their voices do have a phase quality. It does happen. It's a real thing. We've seen it 100 times on stages on these movies. And so to have the foresight to be able to make some of those level changes live and carry that through the live mix that ended up being used for such a long time and into our final mix really made all the difference. And that's what I think was so special about this team, was that all of these choices were made at an early stage of the process. And so many of those choices influenced how we made this film and this soundtrack all the way through the rest of the process. And personally, I've never been on a show where you have the benefit of early choices being so influential throughout the rest of post-production. So that's just one of many examples. And it was a real thrill to have that as a foundation for making the track.
Nancy, do you want to talk about tackling that scene?
Oh, well, I would have to speak mostly on behalf of Robin Bainton, who did the heavy lifting for all the singing parts of that scene. But he and I did a lot of, because that is probably the best example of moving from dialogue to singing to dialogue to singing. And so there's a lot of passing back and forth of material. And I'm so astounded by especially that moment in the song, because ultimately it would not have been possible to use a live recording if Ari and Cynthia weren't such masters at their crafts and had such technical control, which they, trained and worked so hard. But they really did a lot of the mixing in their performance as well.
And also, Tim, something that I didn't speak on that I'd like to bring up. We spoke a little bit about how the tempo was different on every take, and we had a little bit of a cheat code for that. I didn't want to give Ari or Cynthia any kind of click track in their ear, because again, I just want them to feel like they can do whatever they want, and a click track is kind of instructive. So what we did was we gave Ben Holder a click track in his IEM. Now, Ben is such a consummate professional, just so experienced. He knew when he could just ignore that click track, and when he had to ignore the click track to support what he's watching on his monitor in front of his keyboard, which is 3 camera shots and Ari and Cynthia doing their thing. But then the moment he could, without them knowing, and I'm sure they instinctively knew what he was doing, but without them knowing, he'd lock back into that click. And then what we did was we kind of had notes, and we'd say, okay, so we went completely helter-skelter from bar 6 to bar 20, but then on bar 21 we were back into click, and all of those notes went all the way down the line to Jack, so that he kind of knew when we'd broken the rules and when we were back in shape again. And that kind of gave them the freedom, but meant that we had some kind of integrity of tempo.
And by the way, oftentimes when we were recording in London with our executive music producer, Stephen Aremus, who's been on the show for 20 years since the very beginning, he was our conductor in London. So sometimes we would just turn the click off in London even and have him conduct the earlier parts of For Good completely rubato based on the singing performance. So the fact that we were able to piece it together was a multi-stage process, the one that Simon just described, reverse engineering the pre-records in Pro Tools during post-production, but then ditching some of that and recording it from scratch in London using the vocal performances as our guide. So the result is an incredibly natural, character-driven result and performance that comes together because of all of these different stages and ingredients.
There's an amazing moment at the end of For Good where they hit the big notes, it pauses, and then they say For Good one last time. And the distance between those, if it had all been pre-recorded, would not be the distance that's in the film, if that makes sense. Like, it feels like their emotions picked that interval, not a click track kind of thing. And I didn't feel that the first time I watched it, but the second time I watched it, I was just like, that's pretty amazing. Like, that's acting and singing and craft and everything coming together in a quiet moment that I think 99.9999999% of the movie watchers will never know anything other than that it hit them in their heart kind of thing, and not know all of the effort that went into being able to make that magic happen. It was pretty impressive.
I'm
Awesome
so
to hear,
happy you
man.
mentioned that. That's my favorite moment in the whole song. By far.
It's impressive. Let's take it to a bit of from a quiet moment I just mentioned to one of the loudest moments. John, do you want to talk about the tornado, the cyclone, how you came up with the sound of that? Because it's a pretty impressive scene. And also it starts with the moment where it's all off screen. We just see the actor moving her hands wildly, which probably in a silent moment would be comedic, but when with the sounds you added becomes terrifying.
Yeah, it's a fun moment. I mean, you try not to get overwhelmed by, you know, the epic nature of what you're doing. You know, making the tornado for the Wizard of Oz pretty feather in the cap moment. It's pretty sweet. But yeah, it was great. There's a lot of moments like this in the movie where we get a chance to play up some really great dynamics. You know, it builds from Morrible just doing her magic, but it's starting quiet and low, just manipulating the natural wind around her, which then expands outward. So we get to build from these small little, seemingly small, not so powerful sounds of wind moving and slowly building and affecting the environment around until we get to the point where like it reaches a threshold. And then I was just kind of starting to play with the abstractness of the sound of the tornado. You know, John's very, of course, focused on it having character and having, it's not just a wall of white noise and a debris field. It has to be evocative of something. And so I was messing around with a bunch of, you know, the World War, those German plane dive bombers, and that, and just manipulating the tonal bends of deep brass and some deep horn types of things to kind of get something that was a bit more of a gestural sound, not synthetic or anything, but maintaining some organic stuff to it. But it has a singular tone to latch onto, and has some movement to it, and maybe hopefully is evocative of terror from above coming down. Yeah, and of course then focusing on all that low end, man. Big fan of the low end, so it's good to see that in the theater for sure.
After you've designed all the sounds and now you're on the stage mixing it, controlling all that low end, do you want to talk about how you tamed it? Or I guess maybe you tamed it while you were cutting it. I don't know.
John and Meyer and Kirsten, our picture editor, were very adamant about us all sharing space together and being able to kind of bounce around from room to room and just, you know, develop this language together. And so I'm always working with what Jack has provided temporarily for music. And when we get the scratch tracks from John Powell and they start going in, and, you know, Nancy's dialogue's always front and center. So I'm always kind of like having a picture of where everything's going to fit in the mix and an idea of where we're going to go and where we're going to go with power, where score is potentially going to be, you know, driving the emotion. This was just one of the scenes that had a lot of, you know, it was about the tornado. So, you know, music's going to play a part. It's going to kind of set like a little framework for all the power. And, you know, the way Andy works is it's great. He's able to mix and keep things framing the screen. All the screen channels, then he leaves wide open for dialogue, practical production sound, and the sound effects and stuff. So it really had a lot of great space to work in to kind of fill all the frequencies that we're going to be using for that moment, but still being able to maintain the emotional kind of like framing that the score was doing.
So between Wicked and Wicked for Good, this is, I'm assuming, a long chunk of the last while of your life. Did you guys get a break between these two films? Were you able to work on other projects, or have you been on Wicked nonstop? Nancy, do you want to take that first?
The sound crew had a couple months in between, I think.
Yeah, there's like some intermittent like hiatus kind of weeks in there for the holiday and some other stuff too.
Yeah, it was around the winter break and everything. And I think the picture editorial and music had maybe the month of November to chill out for a bit and then right back into it. So yeah, and I didn't do anything else in between. We just wanted to keep the momentum going.
Yeah, the visual effects demand for Wicked for Good, everyone knew was going to be very heavy. There's a lot of animals that need to be rendered. There's a lot of the flying monkeys. And so it was very important to John, but also the studio, to start the process of getting the visual effects together as early as possible. But if you do that, then you're opening up the picture. And if you open up the picture, then everybody needs to be involved to start telling the story. So we did get a couple weeks, like Nancy said, but it was pretty much all hands on deck right after we finished the first one. And I think it was actually a good thing looking back, because we needed to recall where we had left off with the second film. We did put together a director's cut of the second film early on, and we put it to bed for several months while we finished the first movie. But it was a good idea to sort of dust that off and take a look at where we left off and start up right all over again. So yeah, it was all the way through. I mean, for most of us, it was 3 years of our lives, almost to put these two movies together.
We shot Wicked and Wicked for Good as one big movie on the film set. Now, what was really smart working with Mark Platt and the support that he gave me and John Chu was that they had me in for 4 months of prep before we shot anything. And that meant that I could really, really get dialed. We designed a Pro Tools kit specifically for Wicked. It had everything that we required for that movie. It was nothing like a normal playback Pro Tools rig that we would be using on any other musical. It was designed specifically to be working with the live keyboard. It was designed specifically to be able to record Pro Tools and playback Pro Tools at the same time. We were bouncing stuff in and out of Robin Bainton, who was the vocal editor, so that he could be working with Myron on the cut as we were shooting. And so basically, what this was for me was 4 months of prep and then a year of shooting. It was the longest project a production sound mixer could possibly have. And really what that meant, it meant that we could just get things right. It meant that I had the time to think about stuff and to make the right decisions. Production sound on movies can unfortunately be sometimes very reactive, and that's cool. We make the right decisions, we get thrown problems and we solve them, and that's what the job is. But actually, it was really refreshing to be able to make a plan, have exactly the right equipment because we thought about it, have John Chu on hand at all times and say, hey, John, how are you thinking about doing that? Because I've had this idea, and if we did this and that, and we had this kind of playback, and we could roll straight from the keyboard into the Pro Tools, and just being able to have those conversations before we ever shot a frame of the movie really meant that we came in with the best intentions. Of course, things change. I'm not saying that we weren't ready to change and solve problems, but it means that you're starting from a really strong position.
So when you push out the DCP for Wicked 1, before you start on For Good, do you have any kind of like post-mortem as like the audio post team? Like, this is what we can do better. This is how we have to change. This nearly killed me. We can't do it this way again. Like, is there an actual meeting, or do you just dive back in?
I think we were able to adapt and, stick and move and make the necessary changes during the process of Wicked 1. So by the time we got to the end, we had a pretty great flow going, and not only between us, but between all the other departments and especially music. So we just sort of continued. Would you say, John?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we collectively all said, well, Wicked Part 1 was 8 reels long for us to work on. And so we jumped into Part 2 for Good, and it was like, here we're on to reel 9. It just felt like you had like a break. You're working on one continuous movie, and you just had a break before you jump back into the second half of it. So yeah, there was a lot of things worked out, which gave us a lot more leverage and freedom maybe in Part 2, because we didn't have to work certain kinks out, and it allowed for a bit more free flow of creativity, a lot more time to explore certain ideas. And yeah, we were all very familiar with each other's sensibilities by that point. So.
Yeah, I was just going to add that, the post-mortem is the process of doing the first film. I mean, there were a lot of things we had to learn, a lot of shorthand we had to develop among our sound team and across all of editorial. And once you develop all that and you develop all these bits of intuition, there's so much you take for granted moving into the second film. You're actually a lot more productive because you've ironed out so many of those kinks. So I would say the post-mortem was the real-time process of putting together something as massive as Wicked Part 1 and letting those lessons guide you into the next film.
I was just going to say, like, this is probably a situation that we'll never be in again, where we get to do a full movie and have such a positive experience and then just keep making that movie for another year after. It was really a gift.
I think that there's something quite unique that happens with Andy Nelson that's worth discussing at this point as well, because I feel like it's kind of one of the glue points that bands everything together and makes Wicked and Wicked for Good what it is. And that's that he treats vocals and dialogue the same. He premixes the vocal and the dialogue as if they're the same entity, which of course they are because they're recorded live on the set. But I think that that is one of the backbones that kind of guides everything. And certainly I think that that comes across when you hear the mix. There isn't any of those weird EQ differences and awkward transitions from singing. And that doesn't just come because we're using live dialogue and normal musicals go into playback of vocals. It's also because Andy treats these two entities as the exact same thing.
They were even printed to the same stem. Like there wasn't a separate vocal stem, separate from dialogue or group or anything. Everything was just recorded together as one element.
And the requirement of that approach was at the forefront of so many of these scenes in Wicked for Good. There are scenes like The Wicked Witch of the East where the dance between dialogue and vocal is constant. It's almost like a film within a film. And it's a non-traditional song from the perspective of Broadway musicals because there's so much dialogue interspersed throughout it. So having that approach that Simon just described, Andy's approach of treating dialogue and vocals the same, was employed to an even greater extent on this film. And I think that we had refined our methods for doing that to such a degree that those more challenging scenes where the dance exists, we were able to really, rise above those challenges and make them sound as seamless as possible on the second film.
There was a really cool technique that is so minor, and I'm not sure if you guys thought of this or if it was right from the script, but the film starts immediately. We don't wait 10 seconds to see the various cards at the beginning. Like, the sound kicks in immediately. So it's like there's no time has passed. We're going right into the movie right away, which really hypes it up and makes you, you're not easing into it. We're there right from the start, which makes it feel more like a continuation than a part two, if that makes sense. Well, I think it does make sense, because that was the intention, I'm assuming.
Yeah, I mean, we're following the Broadway musical. It's just the intermission, and we pick right back up where we left off. It's a time jump, but yeah, there's no remember back when, and there's no familiarizing ourselves with part one. We go right into it.
And your sounds, John, in the opening over the logo, as we're building up and you start hearing Morable's speech, those were all kind of continuations or reminiscent of certain elements of the opening of movie one, but then morphed and kind of tailored to this new kind of desolate landscape that we're going into, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, and they're also making space for Morable as she's giving her announcement too. But yeah, we're kind of like tipping the hat to the way we started the movie and kind of hopefully, helping people remember if they haven't been binging on part one before they see part two for the first time.
Well, we're running out of time, and I'm just wondering if maybe we can go around the horn real quick to at each of you say what was either your greatest, maybe leave it at this. What was your favorite triumph that you had? Something that was maybe put towards you at the beginning that you thought, oh, how the hell are we going to do this? And then you figured it out and were able to achieve what the director wanted. Jack, do you want to go first?
Sure. I mean, there's so many. The one that immediately comes to mind now that, because we were just talking about the opening of the film, the first musical number, Every Day More Wicked, is a real heavy lift because not only is it an immensely complicated song, but it also narratively is responsible for catching the audience up on where all the characters have been over this interim period, what they've been doing, what their challenges are. We go through different locations, whether it's the Emerald City and all the masses who have now decided that they are 100% against this wicked witch, whether it's to Elphaba's lair, where we're discovering the way she lives now and who she has become, to Glinda and Madame Morrible and the sort of propaganda of her life and the goodness that she has sort of inherited through this propaganda. And the song has to go through each of these characters and introduce individual reprises, thematic reprises that encapsulates those little narrative points. And so the song is very challenging to make work musically because you have to find a way for the orchestration to feel seamless. But it's even more of a challenge when you introduce all the different soundscapes of those locations and make it feel like one whole around the horn catch up that also thrusts you into the movie. And we worked so hard on getting the ensemble vocals to feel like an angry mob, to going into the individual soloistic performances and have the orchestration from Stephen and his team thread its way through the whole thing. And I'm really proud of how that ended up, because by the time you get to the end of that song and you then get into the sort of more traditional narrative of the movie, you felt like you've had that really satisfying sort of review, if you will, of where the characters have been. And it also feels deeply satisfying as a musical number, which is the whole point. You know, you can't advance the story in a musical without doing it through music. And that's such a great example of that. So yeah, that would be one that I'm really proud of putting together and working with this team to make feel convincing.
Nancy?
I'm probably most proud of just the clarity, and as me being mostly on the dialogue ADR side, the way we got these incredible choices and incredibly well-recorded tracks from Simon, and we're able to carry those through and use very minimal ADR just to make sure every emotion was supported. And I actually had a pinch me moment after one of the premieres we got to go to. I saw Cynthia Erivo, and she pointed at me and she said, "Thank you." And I was incredibly touched. And she said, "Thank you for the choices that you made." And I feel like on the dialogue side, our number one job is to preserve those performances from set and the intentions of the actors and the filmmakers. And I feel like we achieved that, and it didn't go unnoticed by the rest of our team. So
Yeah, there's so many. The big things that you would naturally gravitate towards are the big spectacle moments, no good deed and the tornado and all that stuff. But actually, I found the most rewarding and challenging moments to be the quiet ones. The songs in particular, For Good and Girl in the Bubble. These are songs that are so delicate and so emotionally supercharged, and they're so intimate, but they're still in a world that you need to, as an audience member, know that they're in this world, that they're not on a set. And so it was amazingly satisfying realizing all the littlest thing. If a wind swells in the wrong frequency at the wrong time, it's just all of a sudden it's like everyone in the room, you can feel it. Like you're locked in, and any little thing, whether it's a footstep or something so small and that's so mundane. And so I had a lot of fun and being challenged in that, and like trying to ride that line of like keeping believability, keeping the world alive without intruding, but at the same time using all these little things to support what's going on in the scene with the characters. So those are the big things to me. It's like making those quiet, delicate moments land, and the end when the girls are behind the door and we go through the whole sequence of Dorothy showing up. It just knocks me out every time, and no matter how many times I've seen it, it's just so powerful.
For sure. Simon, do you want to take it?
As a production sound mixer on films, I never thought that I was going to be able to record a rock performance. And that's what I got with No Good Deed. That was like a big, big rock and roll performance. Not only was it big and loud and expansive, but it was also with an actor flying through the air on wires who could actually sing perfectly as she was doing it. But there was just something raw and raucous, and it was just rock and roll. And there's not going to be many opportunities in my career for me to feel like I've just recorded a rock performance. And that's what I got with No Good Deed. But more importantly, just across the whole of the movie, what I'm really, really proud of is the way that the sound and the music team on the set collaborated together. Not only did we have this incredible shorthand between all of us who are on this call right now, from prep through production through post, where we were just all talking to each other, but actually on the set, the music team and the production sound team worked as one cohesive unit, and that doesn't always happen. We're normally kind of taking care of our own business, but what we realized in prep on Wicked for Good was that we really, to be able to pull this off, we had to just become one big department, and that's what we did. And it was just so refreshing, and it was so performance driven, and it just worked really, really well.
Amazing. Well, thanks for talking to me today. Congratulations on pulling off this absolutely massive endeavor. And I can say from the point of view of my 10-year-old daughter, the first one when it came out in theaters, she wasn't quite old enough to be into it yet, but like in the last few months, she's discovered it. Was so excited to see this part 2. Well, not for good, sorry. And it was one of the best nights to go with her and watch her just lose her mind and be so excited about it. So congratulations, and thanks for talking to me today, and hopefully we get to talk again soon.
Thank you, Tim.
Thanks, Tim.
Tim, what a pleasure.
I cannot imagine working on a project as massive as these 2 Wicked films. Thanks to Nancy, Jack, John, and Simon for talking me through the whole process. Thanks for listening, everyone. As the new year begins, Sound Ideas is offering its largest sale to date. For a limited time, receive 55% off professionally recorded sound effects and music libraries. This New Year promotion applies across their esteemed catalog, making it an ideal moment to expand or update your professional collection with authentic audio and a proven standard of quality. The Sound Ideas New Year's sale is available now for a limited time, so go visit sound-ideas.com right away. Tonebenders is produced by me, Timothy Muirhead. Theme music is by Jim Guthrie. You can reach me via email through info@tonebenderspodcast.com. Follow Tonebenders on Instagram to stay on top of new episodes. If you like the show, you can help us out by spreading the word to your friends and colleagues, or leave us a tip. Just go to tonebenderspodcast.com and click support.